Geoff, who will discuss the Beaverhill Lake IBA in more depth and a little bit about what the Beaverhill Bird Observatory does.
Thanks, Zoe. Um, I guess you know my name. I'm chair of the Beaverhill Bird Observatory, and we are also the caretaker stewards of the Beaverhill Natural Area and Beaverhill IBA. The Beaverhill Bird Observatory was formed in 1984. When I moved to Edmonton, there was a group of people bird banding out at Beaverhill Lake, but I said, based on my experience at Long Point, why don't we create a Western Bird Observatory? And it was actually the second bird observatory established in Canada. And I'd like to think it partly led the way for the formation of the Migration Monitoring Network. The Bird Observatory acted not only to monitor birds in the natural area and conduct research there, but we also helped to train some of the banders that now run other bird observatories in Western Canada. This slide's a little bit funny. The last time I gave this talk, I was at the Ellis Bird Farm near Red Deer, so we're located actually more accurately about 80 kilometers east of Edmonton, just east of the town of Tofield on Highway 14. If you're ever in the area, please drop by and visit from middle of April to early November. Originally, the Bird Observatory was in a aspen willow grassland clearing. You can see our buildings there with the lake in the background. That view is looking north. I'll show you a picture shortly of how that changed dramatically, but it was a very open, early successional habitat based on the recent drying of the area and drying of the land. And it was an ideal place for monitoring bird migration in low vegetation. We've banded birds there since 1984, and starting about 1990, did it more systematically, hired staff, and did a lot more intensive monitoring than probably most stewards do or most caretakers do of most IBAs. But it's also central to our own interests. We hire staff through the summer, and we're lucky enough this winter that our 3 summer staff, we have funding to keep them going all winter and doing public education. So banding, of course, is a key element. It involves putting a aluminum band around the leg of a bird. It has a unique number on it, and the bands are issued by the Canadian Wildlife Service, and they keep track of all the records of bird bands used, the numbers used. We report to them every year. And if anyone finds a band, then we hear about it, and that way we can start to monitor movements of birds where they're going to and from. But the chances of getting a bird recovered, small bird, is roughly 1 in 1,000. So clearly that's a huge effort to get one band recovery. But we can learn a lot more about the birds and the monitoring of them by looking at the bird itself, determining its plumage, its age, its sex. We weigh and measure them. We can look for changes in the morphology of the bird. Aging and sexing has taken on a whole new dimension since I first started bird banding at Long Point in 1961. We know a lot more about plumages of birds, and we can be much more accurate at aging and sexing them than we could be. So we can look for changes in the migration monitoring or migration timing of these birds. So as I mentioned, Beaverhill was the second bird observatory in Canada. The Bird Studies Canada now coordinates the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network, a system of 30 or so stations monitoring bird migration across Canada. We get together every couple of years, but also actively share information and have worked towards standardized protocols so that our monitoring from year to year, we can establish trends. So in the spring, we conduct migration monitoring, 13 mist nets operated from 30 minutes before dawn for 6 hours. So that is the same protocol that is used at all of the networks through the spring till June 10th. We then switch over to another program called MAPS, Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship. It's coordinated by the Institute of Bird Populations in California and provides a standardized technique for monitoring breeding birds in the Beaverhill Natural Area. And then in the fall, we switch back to the monitoring protocol I've already mentioned for the fall until October 20th, overlapping, So all of that information is then fed to Bird Studies Canada to a website called Nature Counts, and it's all available to researchers who are interested in bird movements around the world, really. So it's not quite a citizen science because we're not strictly doing it as citizens, but it's an open source website where people can look for information that are studying birds. If they want it downloaded, they contact the Bird Observatory and we freely grant permission for researchers to use our information to learn more about patterns of bird movements. The website also allows us to graph our information. Bird Studies Canada helps to do that. So here, for example, is the trend information for Trails flycatcher, the complex that has since been split into alder and willow flycatcher, and you can see a decline of about 11% per year, a pretty significant decline happening through the almost 30 years that the Bird Observatory had been operating when this graph was created. Not all the news is bad, though. You can see here graphs for other migrants, ruby-crowned kinglet, Swainson's thrush, and hermit thrush, and they appear to be undulating patterns, what we would hope would happen. Birds increase in abundance and then decrease. And interesting for these three species, you can see there's a period there in the late 1990s where they all seem to be increasing together. So that's kind of good news that the environment was suitable for all three of them and they're reacting to it. We don't have a continuous decline like we did with the Trails flycatcher. Also in the fall, starting early September, we monitor saw-whet owl migration. It's a set protocol with 4 mist nets, call playback, operated from 30 minutes after sunset for 6 hours. That allows us to track saw-whet migration. Of course, we do all the same aging and sexing information measurements that we do on songbirds. On the right is a boreal owl, so once in a while we catch boreal owls, a bird that was virtually unknown in the Parkland region until we started catching them. This past fall we only caught one, but they definitely come out of the boreal forest more often than we realized before we started doing this owl migration monitoring. And here you can see a graph from 2004, the number of owls. We didn't know when the migration started in 2004, so we started the monitoring in the middle of August. Obviously, that was pretty boring for the staff, staying up for 6 hours and not catching anything. So now we start in early September. We're currently analyzing our multi-year data set, but there seems to be a trend to the owls moving earlier in the fall than what they did when we first started in the early 2000s. And you can also see the peak there at the end of September, early October. We use that peak to host one of our public events. It's called Steaks and Saw-whets. We invite the public out. We have a pile of volunteers. We organize steaks, roast potatoes, corn, salads, desserts, coffee, tea. People come out at 6 o'clock before dark, have a big supper. It's a fundraiser and community awareness for us, public awareness. And then they stick around. We set the nets, start the call playback, and trap owls so they can see the activity live. And our 2 evenings are sold out every year. They sell out very quickly as soon as we announce the dates on our website. So it's a very popular activity. Of course, by banding bigger birds like saw-whet owls, we find out more about where they move. This was an earlier graph. You can see that this represents a migration from multiple stations, Lesser Slave Lake there north of Beaverhill Lake, and then a bunch of stations in central southern Saskatchewan. The bulk of the birds in the fall are moving southeast towards the Great Lakes. There's been one recovery out as far east as Maine. A couple now have gone south to Colorado, and we now have 2 that have gone to Vancouver and Vancouver Island. So the migration of saw-whets appears to be much more complex than many other species where there's more of a north-south trend to the abundance of birds. And it could in fact be there's a big element of nomadism in what these owls are doing. Although some of them move southeast in the fall, they can move just about any direction after we've banded them. We also operate 3 grids of tree swallow boxes, a bluebird trail, 2 grids of house wren boxes, and recently we put up a purple martin box which attracted birds to the outside of the box, but they never went inside that we know of. So we're hopeful that we can have purple martins. The tree swallows I'm going to mention in a minute. Oh, I guess I'm mentioning them right now. So we've analyzed our trends of tree swallow productivity and box occupancy from 84 till 5 years ago, 2012, and in fact found a 10% decline. So one of the reasons we've started looking at our data more critically is that tree swallows are declining continentally. They're still an abundant bird, but their abundance has gone down. So what we find at Beaverhill is they're laying 10% fewer eggs, and they're producing 9.5% fewer young. Obviously, if they lay fewer eggs, they're not going to have as many young. So that's cause for concern. We've also had a much more dramatic decline, a 26% decline in the number of boxes that are actually occupied. So in fact, the population is declining at Beaverhill at the same time. And nest success, so that where there's total failures, has increased 12% over the same time frame. So a lot of negative indicators from our tree swallow boxes, even though they're relatively abundant. One of the curious things that trying to figure out why this is happening is the date of the first egg is actually later now than it was in 1984 by upwards of a week or more. So curiously, why are they laying eggs later? Climate change predicts that we're supposed to be getting warmer. So just quickly review, the date of the first egg is later, the clutch size is smaller, there's fewer young or fledged, fewer nest attempts, and lower percent are successful. So the question then is why? And of course, that's always the hard part. It's hard enough collecting trend data like we've got here over 30 years. It becomes even harder. So as our climate warms, tree swallows should nest earlier and have more eggs and young. And in fact, in the eastern U.S. and New York State, Winkler et al. Published a report from 1959 to 1991 saying that the tree swallows there were initiating clutches earlier, up to 9 days earlier. But so why aren't they at Beaverhill Lake? When we look at our May temperatures in the central Alberta, it's actually colder now in May than what it was 30 years ago. So although climate change says our averages are getting warmer, and in fact the Edmonton average is warmer, when we inspect the data, it's warmer in February at night than it used to be, which drives the annual average. But when we inspect May, it's actually cooler now. So obviously when it's cooler, that means it's fewer insects, which then slows down the time of nesting of tree swallows. It's unclear if that then drives the lower nesting success or if other factors have compounded it. So I showed you on the left the picture of what the bird observatory looked like in '85 when we started. That's the same view from a small aircraft in 2013 on the right, and you can just barely make out our larger building. The other two buildings have disappeared into the trees. The willows have virtually gone from a lot of the forest. The aspen has grown up, and the bird observatory is now in the middle of a aspen forest. And maybe more importantly for the tree swallows, you can see barely make out the old shoreline with light green to the north. The lake has dried up. The good news is in 2017 the lake was about half full, so we're hopeful that if we can get some more snowfall in central Alberta, it will fill up even more. However, with the drying of the lake, that results in less food for tree swallows. One of their key food items are midges, chironomids, that come out of the lake bed. And if there's no lake, then obviously there's fewer of those insects. So that could in fact be driving the decline in productivity of our tree swallows. But of course, climate change is still implicated in the drying of the lake. With warmer temperatures and lower snowfall, the lake has ultimately dried up. We've also undertaken other research. This is kind of beyond the role of a caretaker of important bird areas, tracking tree swallows with geolocators in cooperation with Ryan Norris at the University of Guelph and his students. The geolocators record light levels, which can be interpreted to determine sunrise and sunset, which can then be used to interpret the geolocation or the geographic location of where the swallows are. So this is a crude map. The tree swallows leave central Alberta within a week of their young fledging. The bulk of them go down to the Dakotas or just beyond the green circles there. and spend upwards of 2 months where they're presumably molting. Then they continue on to their wintering areas, the East Coast, Georgia and Florida, Mississippi. Quite a few of them cross the Gulf to the Yucatan. One even continued to Honduras, and some over on the west coast of the Gulf near Veracruz. And then in the very rapid 3-week migration, they come back in early May to central Alberta. So we now know a lot more about where these swallows are wintering and moving. And one of the key pieces of information here is our swallows are totally dependent on the wetlands of the Dakotas of the Midwest of the United States for food while they're molting. So they leave here and they have to regrow their flight feathers and a lot of their body feathers in the Dakotas. And if those wetlands aren't there, our swallows will be even in more trouble. We've done other satellite telemetry through the Bird Observatory. This particular map is a snowy owl that was put on in cooperation with Hardy Pletz, near Edmonton. It went slightly south in April, went over to Saskatoon, and then it made its way more rapidly. The map continued up into the Arctic Islands, Victoria Island, where that snowy owl nested. So we have birds that are coming down here in the winter and then going back up to the Arctic for the summer. Oops. We do other monitoring as well: bats, mammals, butterflies, amphibians. Each year we have interns sponsored by the SCIP program, Serving Community Internship Program. This last year we hosted 15 interns. We recruit mentors to mentor the interns, and the interns do a field study and do a report, so they get a publication on the BBO website for their CV, and the Bird Observatory learns more about other creatures that our staff don't have time to monitor. So this has turned out to be very valuable, both to learn more about the other species in the natural area, in the IBA area, but also by repeating them year after year to be able to monitor trends in some of these other species besides birds. The Bird Observatory also coordinates the Nocturnal Owl Survey across Alberta. That's a program coordinated by Bird Studies Canada across Canada. And in Alberta, Lisa Priestley coordinates it on behalf of the Bird Observatory and has monitored trends. If you're interested, the fall issue, I believe it was, of the Parkland Naturalist, the Edmonton Nature Club, had a multi-year summary that Lisa published showing the trends of Alberta owls based on these spring surveys. So one of the challenges for the Bird Observatory, a key one, is the disappearance of the lake and what that means to our bird monitoring and the vegetation. It also means that where the lake provided a fence for cattle, the cattle now have free range over the lake bed. So we've been working with local landowners. We've put in new fencing to the north of the natural area to keep cows out. Strangely, on the northeast corner, the fence somehow disappears and cows come back into the natural area. And we're regularly on the phone with that landowner, pointing out that his cows are trespassing. I'm not sure I should say this ongoing, but anyway, one of these days I'm hoping they go right through the natural area and trespass on the farmer to the west, and maybe the farmer to the east will stop creating holes in the fence. But anyway, that's another issue. But it is a stewardship caretaking issue. Because we've done all this monitoring, far more than most IBAs would ever have done. We've got trend information. You can see the declining trends in the numbers of birds in our migration monitoring, both spring and fall. So one of the key differences, we're not getting the big pulses, the really good years of migrants anymore. They're kind of, that's kind of a negative record for all species migrating through the Beaverhill IBA area. We have lots of other achievements too in terms of education. We have a lot of on-site education. We have educational programs for children. So when they turn up with their families, if there's no birds to be caught, we have a bunch of activities to entertain the kids until we catch some birds to show them what we're doing there. I mentioned the steaks and saw-whets. In the spring, we have a 2-day weekend event, a big birding breakfast where we serve crepes. We have two master crepe makers. Last year it was a face-off between French crepes and Ukrainian crepes um, on the two different mornings, and 50 to 70 people turn up each morning for crepe breakfast and to witness our bird banding. We do charge for these events, so it becomes a small fundraiser for us too. And I already mentioned steaks and saw-whets, 2 evenings in early October. So if you're in the Edmonton area and want to come and join us, keep track on our website, and you're welcome to join these events. Other groups come out, young scouts, Girl Guides, junior forest wardens. We book those groups to try and avoid confusion. A really popular one now is the Saw-whet owl migration. I think the real advantage, it happens in the evening. People don't have to get up before dawn to witness our bird migration monitoring, although lots of people do turn up. In the last couple of years, we've also started a program with our staff in the winter, taking an owl to school. So we have now, under permit from Alberta Fish and Wildlife, 2 saw-whet owls. These were runts taken out of 2 different nests. And I just returned from Calgary, where I talked to my grandchildren's classes, 5 classes in 3 days, about bird conservation. One of them wanted me to talk about avian flight, a grade 6 class. So we have great specific talks that address topics in the Alberta curriculum. So we're not just turning up to entertain the kids, we're actually meeting the teachers' needs to deliver the curriculum to the children, but doing it with a live owl and a added material that the teachers often don't have access to. So this has been a very successful program in the winter. We also have lots of other activities. If we're talking to kindergarten or grade 1, then we have hands-on activities with the birds as well as slide talks. 2 years ago, we started a new program in the natural area in the IBA, a young ornithologist workshop, patterned somewhat after Bird Studies Canada's Terry Young Ornithologist Workshop. And we host 8 students, high school students, the first week of August for a week. They camp at the Bird Observatory. Helen Treffry was the spearhead of that, the lady on the right-hand side of the right-hand picture, and she turns up every afternoon with a hot supper, and then the students make their own breakfast and lunch in a collaborative effort. We have teams who do the dishes, but they also get to go out bird banding every morning. Last year we had a couple of super keen high school students. They saw 145 species of birds in the 6 days that they were there. So they actually discovered a new site for shorebirds that we weren't aware of, so it was an added benefit. But it gives the students a chance to see what it's like to be a field biologist. At least a couple of them from the first year have reported back that they've changed their career track and they now want to be biologists. We hope that's a good move on their part. I certainly have enjoyed my career as a biologist, so hopefully they do too. As stewards of the natural area and the IBA, we maintain a trail system for people to hike the trails and signage. Alberta Parks has recently said they would give us access to some of their generic signs and might reproduce the one like you see on your screen now, so that we don't have to keep repainting them every few years, which takes quite a bit of staff time and a lot more skill than I have to come up with artistic renditions like the staff do. So through our stewardship and our mentoring activities, we've reduced the presence of OHVs. So there was a lot of tracks of OHVs. They're now virtually gone. We installed a fence that I mentioned to keep cows out of the natural area. There was some internal fencing going across a wetland, a barbed wire fencing that was totally unneeded. So we've removed almost a kilometer of old fencing. We left the posts there, but we got rid of the barbed wire that's clearly a hazard to some birds. We maintain the existing fence along the edges of cattle pastures. And based on some research in the United States, we've taken, I'm not sure what they're called now, plastic vinyl siding pieces chopped into 3 or 4 inch lengths and put them on barbed wire fences, and that alerts birds that there's a barbed wire fence and they're able to duck under or over it. So we use dark and light flagging alternating, so that in the winter there's dark flagging, in the summer there's light flagging to alert waterfowl and grouse that there's a barbed wire fence. So it's another activity we've undertaken. Also, as citizen scientists, we export all of our bird sightings to eBird, and one of our staff 3 years ago was able to download all of our records going back to 1990 are now available on eBird. So you can actually log on to eBird at a hotspot, log in Beaverhill Bird Observatory, and you'll see the graphs like I'm showing you here of when birds occur by week throughout the year and their relative abundance by the width of the line. So we've got a really good track of what birds occurred when, and now going back approaching 30 years. Eventually we'll computerize our database from 84 to 1990 and get those uploaded too. This was a plug for eBird. If you're not don't participate in eBird, I highly encourage you to. We couldn't get it to download for the webinar, but a researcher has taken all of the tree swallow records on eBird, and the map you see there is where they occur in the winter. So there's actually a western population of tree swallows and an eastern population, just like there is for flickers and juncos. And you can click on the website when you find the right page, and it will show you week by an image for each week, 52 images in a video of the migration of tree swallows north and then back south. And what's really cool is when they hit Alberta, they come from California in late March, early April, and it's not until early May that the Florida population reaches Alberta. So we actually have both populations of tree swallows intermingling in Alberta, which then raises all kinds of interesting scientific and conservation questions about the tree swallows that do nest in Alberta. We've accepted the mandate that the BBO is about connecting people with nature, and taken from a book about connecting people with nature is we hand out free daily doses of vitamin N. Vitamin N, of course, being vitamin nature. Encourage people to come out. So how does a bird observatory function? Maybe a bit more organized than the average stewards for IBAs. We have a board of directors, a head biologist, 2 staff. The staff have actually, one of them's changed. We have volunteer banders, interns, volunteers. We created a membership, so we now offer a life membership for $10. And our membership has gone from 35 members after 30 years to 350 members in 3 years. So that, of course, gives us a much larger membership to ask for volunteers, to ask for funding support, and to provide information back to our members on our activities and other conservation activities. So this talk originally was directed at the Stewards of Alberta Protected Areas Association, SAPA. So I'll just mention them now. If you're in Alberta, and I was just encouraging Nature Alberta to link with SAPA so that stewards of important bird areas have a similar role that members of SAPA have in Alberta protected areas. And of course, Beaverhill Lake is both an IBA and a protected area, so we try to be active with both groups, but in fact it's the same role. It's a matter of who we're reporting to. So it's a volunteer group that monitor protected areas that may or may not be IBAs and report land use abuses back to the province, where the landowner. So they're the eyes and ears of Alberta Parks and Environment. They can do projects such as we have done, removing old barbed wire where it's not needed, putting flags on barbed wire that is needed, maintaining fences, maintaining trails so the public have got somewhere to access the natural area, and putting up signage so people don't get lost. I also encourage you to, if you become a steward for an IBA, to be a citizen scientist, enter your bird records on eBird, your butterfly records on eButterfly. There are other websites. I believe there's one called eNaturalist or iNaturalist. You can host public events. The Beaverhill Lake, as I mentioned, some of those special events we charge for them. That gives us some budget to help pay for the bird observatory. Many of them are free. And then you need to be an incorporated nonprofit to accept interns from the provincial SKIP program that I mentioned. But they've been a real added boon to our knowledge of the Beaverhill important bird areas. You can, of course, put up nest boxes for swallows, bluebirds, owls, ducks, bats, and put up displays at community events. near your IBA to let the public know about it and its role in conservation. So if you have any questions, please contact me, and I gather might be a few minutes to ask questions even now.